By the time the city went dark and freezing, the woman nobody noticed at the bus depot had already stitched a rescue map from fruit peels and broken earphones. Mabel Quispe was 58, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, and wrapped in 2 sweaters as she scrubbed overnight buses at Cusco's frozen edge before dawn. Every morning, she climbed metal steps glazed with frost, carrying a bucket, a rag, and the numb patience of someone paid to erase other people's traces. Most riders never saw her, yet their leftovers told stories more honestly than their faces ever could under the yellow depot lights. Half-eaten tangerines meant someone had been too worried to finish breakfast, and cracked earphones often belonged to kids riding farther than they admitted. Phone numbers scratched into seatbacks appeared again and again, then crossed out, then written elsewhere, like tiny panic flares from people afraid of disappearing. Mabel noticed patterns because loneliness leaves repetitions, and bus routes taught her the city's bruises better than any official map ever could. The widowed flower seller always rode home on Thursdays and left mint candy wrappers, while delivery workers dropped ticket stubs from impossible 6-stop shifts. 2 sisters from the Hill District kept abandoning peach pits and homework sheets, and once a boy left a backpack filled only with socks. Mabel had no money to solve anyone's life, but she understood this much. People fall apart faster when they think nobody is looking. So she began with the size of things she could hide in one apron pocket, because tiny help moves quietly through proud people. She washed and matched lost gloves, then left one clean wool glove on the seat where a shivering rider always sat before sunrise. She folded bus transfer directions in block letters and tucked them beside scratched phone numbers where newcomers might find a safer route home. She tied paper tags onto her thermos, pointing to the alley stall serving the cheapest hot soup before sunrise, no questions asked. She slipped a packet of headache tea near the driver's compartment after seeing the same courier press his temples on 3 straight mornings. She taped together cracked earphones and left them hanging from seat rails, not as charity, but as proof that broken things still worked. She never signed her name because anonymity kept dignity intact, and it let the kindness belong to whoever needed courage that day. At first, nothing looked different, except fewer untouched fruit halves rolling under seats and fewer desperate numbers carved into vinyl backs. Then Mabel found something she had never planted, a clean scarf folded beside one of her soup tags with a note reading, "For the next cold neck." Another morning, a sack of bruised but good potatoes appeared beneath bench 4, labeled "For anyone feeding more mouths than coins allowed." A pharmacy receipt on seat 12 had medicine times circled neatly in blue ink, then below it, a second hand added the cheapest clinic. The city had started answering itself, and the depot floor, once only grime and melted frost, began acting like paper passed between strangers. Mabel sharpened her system the way other people sharpen business plans, by paying attention to what traveled fastest and what stayed useful longest. She learned colored thread tied around notes survived damp better than tape, and symbols helped exhausted riders who could barely read at dawn. A red knot meant urgent warmth, a blue knot marked routes and schedules, and a green knot pointed to food, medicine, or work. She memorized which buses carried market women, which routes picked up students hiding from home, and which seats older men chose when grief made conversation unbearable. Obstacles arrived daily in hard, ordinary forms: supervisors who hated clutter, drivers who tossed her notes, and riders too ashamed to accept help. Some mornings, she found her careful bundles swept into trash bins beside orange peels and muddy newspapers, and she felt foolish enough to stop. Then she changed strategy instead of quitting, shrinking every kindness into something useful enough that even a skeptic would keep it. Notes became ticket-sized and waterproofed with clear packing scraps, gloves were clipped in pairs with safety pins, and food tips were disguised as route reminders. She also stopped guessing what people needed and started reading the evidence more closely, because kindness becomes waste when it serves your imagination instead of reality. If someone left blister bandages, she posted where to buy durable shoes cheaply, and if a rider abandoned school forms, she marked free evening classes. The depot itself became her ledger, with scuffed walls, forgotten packages, and repeated seat choices, forming a living spreadsheet only she could read. Bit by bit, Other invisible workers joined without meetings, slogans, or permission from anyone important enough to delay useful work. A tea vendor began setting aside cracked cups for free refills when Mabel's green thread notes appeared near the terminal gates at dawn. A mechanic started leaving strips of bicycle tube as emergency shoe ties after hearing couriers bless some unnamed helper in the cold. A widowed shopkeeper who once only bought wholesale candles now placed 2 extra candles in plain brown paper beside each weekly bus manifest. Runaway students learned where night classes, day labor, and safe beds intersected because information passed hand to hand more gently than interrogation. Delivery riders began carrying tiny extras in their insulated boxes: a pair of batteries, a sandwich, a penciled address for warm shelter. Nobody announced a movement, yet the depot slowly stopped behaving like a waiting room and started acting like an organism with nerves. Mabel still scrubbed gum from seat rails and rinsed mud from bus steps, but now she cleaned around a pulse she could feel. Then winter tightened its grip with a bitterness that made morning air feel like shattered glass held against the teeth. Power lines failed across whole blocks one brutal night, and the blackout dropped neighborhoods into dark silence just as temperatures plunged below what old walls could hold. Streetlights vanished, apartment stairwells became black wells, refrigerated medicines warmed, phones died, and panic began spreading faster than official updates. The bus depot should have collapsed into confusion, but Mabel's little system had already rehearsed the city in paying attention. Delivery workers arrived first, using memorized routes and handwritten notes because their apps were dead and their bike lights fading. The widowed shopkeeper opened her candlestock and matched names to streets, remembering who lived alone because Mabel's symbols had taught everyone to notice patterns. Students who once hid on buses now carried soup vats from the alley stall, guiding elderly neighbors down icy lanes by candlelight. Mechanics rigged charging corners from bus batteries, drivers relayed insulin requests by memory, and route notes turned into lifelines under wool caps. Mabel stood at the center in her damp boots and 2 sweaters, not commanding anyone, but translating the fragments she had spent years collecting. She knew which mother needed formula near the Hill District, which courier could climb those stairs fastest, and which old man refused help unless it looked like an errand. Because she had watched carefully for so long, she could connect need to person to path in seconds, even while breath smoked around her face. Cracked earphones, once taped by her hand, now carried radio updates through one working bud, passed among volunteers beside steaming cups of thin soup. Those scratched phone numbers on bus seats, once signs of fear, became backup contact chains when dead batteries revived for a few precious minutes. The depot floor filled with labeled bundles of candles, potatoes, blankets, antibiotics, charger time, and names written in thick pencil for freezing hands. By dawn, the place people used to hurry through had become the neighborhood's living circulatory system, pumping help through darkened streets, one small route at a time. When the lights finally returned, the miracle looked almost embarrassingly ordinary. Damp gloves drying on heaters, empty soup vats, smudged lists, sleeping couriers. No statue appeared for Mabel, and no official banner suddenly thanked the woman who had cleaned buses while quietly wiring strangers together. But riders began arriving a little earlier, leaving useful things instead of trash, and reading the walls as if they were community skin. The biggest change was not gratitude, but imitation, because people finally understood that rescue had started long before the emergency. It started when one woman studied leftovers without contempt, treated patterns like invitations, and kept her help small enough to be accepted. That is the part worth stealing for your own life, especially if your hands feel too empty to matter. Notice what repeats around you, because recurring small troubles are often doorways to one fix that can serve many people. Make help specific, light, and dignified, because one precise note or practical object travels farther than a dramatic speech ever will. Build systems from what you can reliably do on tired days, because consistency turns a kind act into infrastructure. Protect people's pride whenever possible, because anonymous mercy often reaches places where public charity is slammed like a locked door. And never dismiss the position you already occupy, because the place that feels invisible may be exactly where the whole neighborhood's threads cross.